Leviticus chapter 11. Animals that may be eaten. The Lord gave Moses and Aaron the following regulations for the people of Israel. You may eat any land animal that has divided hoofs, and also choose cud, but you must not eat camels, rock badgers, or rabbits. They must be considered unclean. They chew the cud but do not have divided hoofs. Do not eat pigs. They must be considered unclean. They have divided hoofs but do not chew the cud. Do not eat these animals or even touch their dead bodies. They are unclean. You may eat any kind of fish that has fins and scales, but anything living in the water that does not have fins and scales must not be eaten. Such creatures must be considered unclean. You must not eat them or even touch their dead bodies. You must not eat anything that lives in the water and does not have fins and scales. You must not eat any of the following birds: eagles, owls, hawks, falcons, buzzards, vultures, crows, ostriches, seagulls, storks, herons, pelicans, cormorants, hoopoes, or bats. All winged insects are unclean, except that those that hop. You may eat locusts, crickets, or grasshoppers, but all the other small things that have wings and also crawl must be considered unclean. Whoever touches the dead body of the following animals will be unclean until evening: all the animals with hoofs, unless their hoofs are divided and they chew the cud, and all four-footed animals with paws. Whoever carries their dead bodies must wash his clothes, but he will still be unclean until evening. Moles, rats, mice, and lizards must be considered unclean. Whoever touches them or their dead bodies will be unclean until evening. But if their dead bodies fall on anything, it will be unclean. This applies to any article of wood, cloth, leather, or sacking, no matter what it is used for. It shall be dipped in water, but it will remain unclean until evening. But if their bodies fall into a clay pot, everything that is in it shall be unclean. You must break the pot. Any food which could normally be eaten, but on which water from such a pot has been poured, will be unclean, and anything drinkable in such a pot is unclean. Anything on which the dead bodies fall is unclean. A clay stove or oven shall be broken, but a spring or a cistern remains clean. Although anything else that touches their dead bodies is unclean. If one of them falls on seed that is going to be sown, the seed remains clean. But if the seed is soaking in water and one of them falls on it, the seed is unclean. If any animal that may be eaten dies, anyone who touches it will be unclean until evening. And if anyone eats any part of the animal, he must wash his clothes, but he will still be unclean until evening. Anyone who carries the dead body must wash his clothes, but he will still be unclean until evening. You must not eat any of the small animals that move on the ground, whether they crawl or walk on four legs or have many legs. Do not make yourselves unclean by eating any of these. I am the Lord your God, and you must keep yourselves holy, because I am holy. I am the Lord who brought you out of Egypt, so that I could be your God. You must be holy, because I am holy. This then is the law about animals and birds, about everything that lives in the water and everything that moves on the ground. You must be careful to distinguish between what is ritually clean and unclean, between animals that may be eaten and those that may not. The purification of women after childbirth. The Lord gave Moses the following regulations for the people of Israel. For 7 days after a woman gives birth to a son, she is ritually unclean, as she is during her monthly period. On the 8th day the child shall be circumcised. Then it will be 33 more days before she is ritually clean from her loss of blood. She must not touch anything that is holy or enter the sacred tent until the time of her purification is completed. For 14 days after a woman gives birth to a daughter, she is ritually unclean, as she is during her monthly period. Then it will be 66 more days before she is ritually clean from her loss of blood. When the time of her purification is completed, whether for a son or a daughter, she will bring to the priest at the entrance of the tent of the Lord's presence a 1-year-old lamb for a burnt offering, and a pigeon or a dove for a sin offering. The priest shall present her offering to the Lord and perform the ritual to take away her impurity, and she will be ritually clean. This then is what a woman must do after giving birth. If the woman cannot afford a lamb, she shall bring 2 doves or 2 pigeons, one for the burnt offering and the other for the sin offering, and the priest shall perform the ritual to take away her impurity, and she shall be ritually clean. Laws concerning skin diseases. The Lord gave Moses and Aaron these regulations. If anyone has a sore on his skin, or a boil, or an inflammation which could develop into a dreaded skin disease, he shall be brought to the Aaronite priest. The priest shall examine the sore, and if the hairs in it have turned white, and the sore appears to be deeper than the surrounding skin, it is a dreaded skin disease, and the priest shall pronounce the person unclean. But if the sore is white and does not appear to be deeper than the skin round it, and the hairs have not turned white, the priest shall isolate the person for 7 days. The priest shall examine him again on the 7th day, and if in his opinion the sore looks the same and has not spread, he shall isolate him for another 7 days. The priest shall examine him again on the 7th day, and if the sore has faded and has not spread, he shall pronounce him ritually clean. It is only a sore. The person shall wash his clothes and be ritually clean. But if the sore spreads after the priest has examined him and pronounced him clean, he must appear before the priest again. The priest will examine him again, and if it has spread, he shall pronounce him unclean. It is a dreaded skin disease. If anyone has a dreaded skin disease, he shall be brought to the priest, who will examine him. If there is a white sore on his skin which turns the hairs white and is full of pus, it is a chronic skin disease. The priest shall pronounce him unclean. There is no need to isolate him because he is obviously unclean. If the skin disease spreads and covers the person from head to foot, the priest shall examine him again. If he finds that it actually has covered the whole body, he shall pronounce the person ritually clean. If his whole skin has turned white, he is ritually clean. But if from that moment an open sore appears, he is unclean. The priest shall examine him again, and if he sees an open sore, he shall pronounce him unclean. An open sore means a dreaded skin disease, and the person is unclean. But when the sore heals and becomes white again, the person shall go to the priest, who will examine him again. If the sore has turned white, he is ritually clean, and the priest shall pronounce him clean. If anyone has a boil that has healed, and if afterwards a white swelling or a reddish white spot appears where the boil was, he shall go to the priest. The priest shall examine him, and if the spot seems to be deeper than the surrounding skin, and the hairs in it have turned white, he shall pronounce him unclean. It is a dreaded skin disease that has started in the boil. But if the priest examines it and finds that the hairs in it have not turned white, and that is not deeper than the surrounding skin, but is light in color, the priest shall isolate him for 7 days. If the spot spreads, the priest shall pronounce him unclean. He is diseased. But if it remains unchanged and does not spread, it is only the scar left from the boil, and the priest shall pronounce him ritually clean. In the case of a person who has been burnt, if the raw flesh becomes white or reddish, the priest shall examine him. If the hairs in the spot have turned white, and it appears to be deeper than the surrounding skin, it is a dreaded skin disease that has started in the burn, and the priest shall pronounce him unclean. But if the hairs in it have not turned white, and it is not deeper than the surrounding skin, but is light in color, the priest shall isolate him for 7 days. The priest shall examine him again on the 7th day, and if it is spreading, it is a dreaded skin disease, and the priest shall pronounce him unclean. But if the spot remains unchanged and does not spread and is light in color, it is not a dreaded skin disease. The priest shall pronounce him ritually clean, because it is only a scar from the burn. When a man or a woman has a sore on the head or a chin, the priest shall examine it. If it seems to be deeper than the surrounding skin, and the hairs in it are yellowish and thin, it is a dreaded skin disease, and he shall pronounce the person unclean. If, when the priest examines him, the sore does not appear to be deeper than the surrounding skin, but there are still no healthy hairs in it, he shall isolate him for 7 days. The priest shall examine the sore again on the 7th day, and if it has not spread and there are no yellowish hairs in it, and it does not seem to be deeper than the skin surrounding, the person shall shave the head except the area round the sore. The priests then isolate him for another 7 days. On the 7th day, the priest shall again examine the sore, and if it has not spread and does not seem to be deeper than the surrounding skin, he shall pronounce him ritually clean. The person shall wash his clothes, and he will be clean. But if the sore spreads after he has been pronounced clean, the priest shall examine him again. If the sore spread, he need not look for yellowish hairs. The person is obviously unclean. But if in the priest's opinion the sore has not spread and healthy hairs are growing in it, the sore has healed, and the priest shall pronounce him ritually clean. When a man or a woman has white spots on the skin, the priest shall examine that person. If the spots are dull white, it is only a blemish that has broken out on the skin. The person is ritually clean. If a man loses his hair at the back or the front of his head, this does not make him unclean. But if a reddish white sore appears on the bald spot, it is a dreaded skin disease. The priest shall examine him, and if there is a reddish white sore, the priest shall pronounce him unclean because of the dreaded skin disease on his head. A person who has a dreaded skin disease must wear torn clothes, leave his hair uncombed, and cover the lower part of his face, and call out, "Unclean, unclean." He remains unclean as long as he has the disease, and he must live outside the camp, away from others. Laws concerning mildew. When there is mildew on clothing, whether wool or linen, or any piece of linen or wool cloth, or on leather or anything made of leather, if it is greenish or reddish, It is a spreading mildew and must be shown to the priest. The priest shall examine it and put the object away for 7 days. He shall examine it again on the 7th day, and if the mildew has spread, the object is unclean. The priest shall burn it, because it is a spreading mildew which must be destroyed by fire. But if, when he examines it, the priest finds that the mildew has not spread on the object, he shall order it to be washed and put away for another 7 days. Then he shall examine it, and if the mildew has not changed color, even though it has not spread, it is still unclean. You must burn the object, whether the rot is on the front or the back. But if, when the priest examine it again, the mildew has faded, he shall tear it out of the clothing or leather. Then, if the mildew reappears, it is spreading again, and the owner shall burn the object. If he washes the object and the spot disappears, he shall wash it again, and it will be ritually clean. This, then, is the law about mildew on clothing, whether it is wool or linen, or on linen or wool cloth, or on anything made of leather. This is how the decision is made as to whether it is ritually clean or unclean. Purification after having skin diseases. The Lord gave Moses the following regulations about the ritual purification of a person cured of a dreaded skin disease. On the day he is to be pronounced clean, he shall be brought to the priest, and the priest shall take him outside the camp and examine him. If the disease is healed, the priest shall order 2 ritually clean birds to be brought together with a piece of cedar wood, a red cord, and a sprig of hyssop. Then the priest shall order one of the birds to be killed over a clay bowl containing fresh spring water. He shall take the other bird and dip it, together with the cedar wood and the red cord and the hyssop, in the blood of the bird that was killed. He shall sprinkle the blood 7 times on the person who is to be purified from his skin disease, and then he shall pronounce him clean. He shall let the live bird fly away over the open fields. The person shall wash his clothes, shave off all his hair, and have a bath. He will then be ritually clean. He may enter the camp, but he must live outside his tent for 7 days. On the 7th day he shall again shave his head, his beard, his eyebrows, and all the rest of his hair on his body. He shall wash his clothes and have a bath, and then he will be ritually clean. On the 8th day he shall bring 2 male lambs and 1 female lamb, a year old, that are without any defects, 3 kilograms of flour mixed with olive oil, and 1/3 of a liter of olive oil. The priest shall take the man and these offerings to the entrance of the tent of the Lord's presence. Then the priest shall take one of the male lambs, together with 1/3 of a liter of oil. He shall offer it as a repayment offering. He shall present them as a special gift to the Lord. For the priest, he shall kill the lamb in the holy place, where the animals for the sin offering and the burnt offerings are killed. He must do this because the repayment offering, like the sin offering, belongs to the priest and is very holy. The priest shall take some of the blood of the lamb and put it on the lobe of the right ear, on the thumb of the right hand, and on the big toe of the right foot of the man who is to be declared ritually clean. The priest shall take some of the olive oil and pour it in the palm of his own left hand, dip a finger of his right hand in it, and sprinkle some of it 7 times. there in the Lord's presence. He shall take some of the oil that is in the palm of his hand, and some of the blood of the lamb, and put them on the lobe of the right ear, on the thumb of the right hand, and on the big toe of the right foot of the man who is to be declared ritually clean. He shall put the rest of the oil that is in the palm of his hand on the man's head. In this way he shall perform the ritual of purification. Then the priest shall offer the sin offering and perform the ritual of purification. After that he shall kill the animal for the burnt offering and offer it with the grain offering on the altar. In this way the priest shall perform the ritual of purification, and the man will be ritually clean. If the man is poor and cannot afford any more, he shall bring for his purification only one male lamb as his repayment offering, as a special gift to the Lord for the priest. He shall bring 1 kilogram of flour mixed with olive oil for a grain offering, and the third of a liter of olive oil. He shall also bring 2 doves or 2 pigeons, one of the sin offering and one for the burnt offering. On the 8th day of his purification, he shall bring them to the priest at the entrance of the tent. The priest shall take the lamb and the olive oil and present them as a special gift to the Lord for the priest. He shall kill the lamb and take some of the blood and put it in the lobe of the man's right ear, on the thumb of his right hand, and on the big toe of his right foot. The priest shall pour some of the oil into a palm of his hand, his own left hand, and with a finger of his right hand sprinkle some of it 7 times there in the Lord's presence. He shall put some of the oil on the same places as he put the blood, on the lobe of the man's right ear, on the thumb of his right hand, and on his big toe of his right foot. The rest of the oil that is in his palm, he shall put it on the man's head, and in this way perform the ritual of purification. He shall offer one of the doves or pigeons as the sin offering, and the other as the burnt offering with the grain offering. In this way the priest shall perform the ritual of purification. This is the law for the man who has a dreaded skin disease and who cannot afford the normal offerings required for his purifications. Mildew in houses. The Lord gave Moses and Aaron the following regulations about houses affected by spreading mildew. These were to apply after the people of Israel enter the land of Canaan, which the Lord was going to give them as their possession. If anyone finds that the Lord has sent mildew on his house, then he must go and tell the priest about it. The priest shall order everything to be moved out of the house, because he goes to examine the mildew. Otherwise, everything in the house will be declared unclean. Then he shall go into the house and examine the mildew. If there are greenish or reddish spots that appear to be eating into the wall, he shall leave the house and lock it up for 7 days. On the 7th day he shall return to examine it again. If the mildew has spread, he shall order the stones on which the mildew is found to be removed and thrown into some unclean place outside the city. After that he must have all the interior walls scraped and the plaster dumped in an unclean place outside the city. Then other stones are to be used to replace the stones that were removed, and new plaster will be used to cover the walls. If the mildew breaks out again in the house after the stones have been removed and the house has been scraped and plastered, the priest shall go and look. If it has spread, the house is unclean. It must be torn down, and its stones, its wood, and all its plaster must be carried out of the city to an unclean place. Anyone who enters the house while it is locked up will be unclean until evening. Anyone who lies down or eats in the house must wash his clothes. If, when the priest comes to look, the mildew has not disappeared after the house has been replastered, he shall pronounce the house ritually clean, because the mildew has been completely removed. To purify the house, he shall take 2 birds, some cedar wood, a red cord, and a sprig of hyssop. He shall kill one of the birds over a clay bowl containing fresh spring water. Then he shall take the cedar wood, the hyssop, the red cord, and the live bird, and shall dip them in the blood of the bird that was killed, and in the fresh water. And he shall sprinkle the house even 7 times. In this way he shall purify the house with the bird's blood, the fresh water, and the live bird, the cedar wood, the hyssop, and the red cord. Then he shall let the live bird fly away outside the city over the open fields. In this way he shall perform the ritual of purification for the house, and it will be ritually clean. There are the laws about dreaded skin diseases, sores, boils, or inflammations, and about mildew in clothes or houses. These laws determine whether something is clean and when it is unclean. Unclean bodily discharges. The Lord gave Moses and Aaron the following regulations for the people of Israel. When any man has a discharge from his private, the discharge is unclean, whether the private runs with it or is stopped up by it. Any bed on which he sits or lies is unclean. Anyone who touches his bed or sits on anything the man has sat on must wash his clothes and have a bath, and when he remains unclean until evening. Anyone who touches the man with the discharge must wash his clothes and have a bath, and he remains unclean until evening. If the man with the discharge spits on anyone who is ritually clean, that man must wash his clothes and have a bath, and he remains unclean until evening. Any saddle or seat on which the man with the discharge sits is unclean. Anyone who touches anything on which the man sat is unclean until evening. Anyone who carries anything on which the man sat must wash his clothes and have a bath, and he remains unclean until evening. If a man who has a discharge touches someone without first having washed his hands, that person must wash his clothes and have a bath, and he remains unclean until evening. Any clay pot that the man touches must be broken, and any wooden bowl that he touches must be washed. After the man is cured of his discharge, he must wait 7 days and then wash his clothes and bathe in fresh spring water, and he will be ritually clean. On the 8th day he shall take 2 doves or 2 pigeons to the entrance of the tent of the Lord's presence and give them to the priest. The priest shall offer one of them as a sin offering and the other as a burnt offering. In this way he shall perform the ritual of purification for the man. When a man has an emission of semen, he must bathe his whole body, and he remains unclean until evening. Anything made of cloth or leather on which the semen falls must be washed, and it remains unclean until evening. After sexual intercourse Both the man and the woman must have a bath, and they remain unclean until evening. When a woman has a monthly period, she remains unclean for 7 days. Anyone who touches her is unclean until evening. Anything on which she sits or lies during her monthly period is unclean. Anyone who touches a bed or anything on which she has sat on must wash his clothes and have a bath, and he remains unclean until evening. If a man has sexual intercourse with her during a period, he is contaminated by her impurity and remains unclean for 7 days, and any bed on which he lies is unclean. If a woman has a flow of blood for several days outside a monthly period, or if her flow continues beyond her regular period, she remains unclean as long as the flow continues, just as she is during her monthly period. Any bed on which she lies and anything on which she sits during this time is unclean. Anyone who touches them is unclean and must wash his clothes and have a bath. He remains unclean until evening. After her flow stops, she must wait 7 days, and then she will be ritually clean. On the 8th day she shall take 2 doves or 2 pigeons to the priest at the entrance of the tent of the Lord's presence. The priest shall offer one of them as a sin offering and the other as a burnt offering, and in this way he will perform the ritual of purification for her. The Lord told Moses to warn the people of Israel about these uncleanliness, as that they would not defile the tent of his presence, which was in the middle of the camp. If they did, they would be killed. These are the regulations about a man who has a discharge or an emission of semen, a woman during a monthly period, or a man who has sexual intercourse with a woman who is ritually unclean.